What would you do if a group of bikers suddenly appeared, blocking your way on a deserted bridge? For Brianna, a young pregnant woman stranded with a dead car engine, the answer would come in a way she never could have predicted. The sun was low in the sky, casting long, stretching shadows over the narrow, winding road ahead. It was one of those rare, quiet Sundays, where the world seemed to slow down just a bit. Brianna, her belly pressing gently against the steering wheel, adjusted her rearview mirror, a small frown tugging at her lips. She'd been on her way back from a family gathering in Beaumont, Texas, a visit that was supposed to be short but, like so many family visits, had stretched on longer than planned. As she approached the old bridge that connected the town to the countryside, her car, a weary, well-worn sedan that had seen far more miles than she cared to admit, sputtered. Brianna's brow furrowed as she gently tapped the gas pedal. The engine coughed once and then went completely silent. She coasted to a stop at the edge of the bridge, the car refusing to budge any further. She exhaled slowly, bracing herself. This wasn't the first time the car had thrown a fit, but the timing was far from ideal. The bridge was narrow, with no shoulder to speak of, and her car was now blocking one of the two lanes. She reached for her phone, ready to call her husband, until she realized she had no signal. A sudden wave of unease washed over her. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind her was empty, for now, but that wouldn't last long. The distant roar of engines grew louder, pulling her attention. She turned to see them, a group of bikers, their silhouettes growing larger with every passing second as they rounded the curve in the road. Brianna's heart began to race. 5? Maybe 6? All clad in leather, their faces hidden behind helmets. The growl of their motorcycles filled the air, their rumbling engines echoing against the steel beams of the bridge. They were coming fast, and she had nowhere to go. Desperation surged through her, and she stuck her arm out the window, trying to wave them down, signaling for them to slow, to understand. But her mind raced with questions. Would they stop? What would they do if they did? The first bike screeched to a halt, its rider leaning forward slightly, as though sizing her up. The others pulled in behind him, their engines still rumbling ominously, as if giving an unspoken warning. Brianna's breath hitched. She gripped her phone tighter, even though she knew it was useless. One of the bikers dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his boots clinking loudly against the pavement as he took purposeful steps toward her. Brianna's fingers hovered nervously over the door lock, her pulse quickening. Every worst-case scenario flooded her mind, each darker and more terrifying than the last. But something in the man's movements, calm, deliberate, suggested that this encounter might not be as dangerous as her fear had painted it. Brianna's knuckles whitened as she tightened her grip on the steering wheel, watching him approach. The others remained on their bikes, their engines still idling, their faces hidden behind reflective helmets. It felt like a scene straight out of a movie, a moment suspended in time, just before chaos was unleashed. The man stopped a few feet from her window, raising one gloved hand in a peaceful gesture. "Hey," he called out, his voice muffled, but steady. "You okay in there?" Brianna hesitated. Her instinct screamed at her to be cautious, but there was a small glimmer of hope, a flicker that maybe, just maybe, these men meant no harm. She glanced down at the window, just enough to speak, her voice trembling. "My car, it stalled. I can't get it to start." The man nodded slowly, his movements calculated. He stepped closer, avoiding any sudden or threatening gestures. His leather jacket bore patches and insignia she couldn't quite read, and his boots were worn for miles on the road. "Pop the hood," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let me take a look." Brianna's heart was pounding. Was this a trick? Was he just looking for an excuse to get closer? She glanced past him at the other bikers, now all dismounted and standing still, watching her. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, the bridge feeling smaller with every second, the world narrowing to just her, the car, and these men. "I don't know," she murmured, her voice shaky. The man stepped back, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace, palms outward. "Look," he said, his tone even, "we're not here to hurt you. But you're blocking the road, and this bridge isn't exactly the safest place to be stuck. Let us help." The words hung in the air, heavy with a strange, unexpected sincerity. Brianna studied his face, or as much of it as she could see through his helmet's open visor. His eyes were sharp, steady, and devoid of malice. Against her better judgment, she reached over, unlocking the hood. He gave a short nod of approval, then turned, signaling one of the other bikers. Two more of them stepped forward, their movements just as cautious, their faces unreadable beneath their helmets. Brianna watched, her heart still racing as they lifted the hood and began examining the engine. She felt trapped, still no relief, still unsure if this was a game or an act of kindness. Every second felt like a gamble. "What's your name?" the first man asked, glancing back at her. "Brianna," she answered after a moment, her voice barely a whisper, but he caught it, nodding slightly. "Brianna," he repeated, turning back to the car. "Looks like your battery might be shot. We'll see if we can jump it, but we'll need to move you to the side first." Her eyes instinctively darted to the edge of the bridge. The drop into the shallow creek below made her stomach twist. She hadn't realized how close she was to the edge, until now. "You think it'll work?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. One of the bikers shrugged. "Worth a shot," he said, his tone casual. Another biker went to his saddlebag, retrieving a set of jumper cables. The faint clink of metal sounded in the quiet, but as they worked, another sound sliced through the steady hum of engines, the distant whine of a car horn. Brianna turned, her heart skipping a beat, as she saw a pickup truck cresting the hill behind them. The driver leaned out the window, shouting something she couldn't quite make out. But the truck wasn't slowing down. The bikers noticed too. One of them stepped into the road, waving his arms, signaling for the truck to stop. "Hold up, man! There's a breakdown here!" But the driver didn't seem to care. Without a second thought, he slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching just inches from the biker. The truck jerked into park, and a burly man in a red baseball cap jumped out, his heavy boots thudding against the pavement as he stormed toward the group. His voice cut through the air, booming and aggressive. "What the hell's going on here?" he shouted, eyes flashing from Brianna to the bikers, suspicion and hostility dripping from his every word. "You messing with her?" Brianna's throat tightened. The tension that had been thick before now felt suffocating, like it was pressing in from all sides. But before anyone could respond, the lead biker stepped forward, his posture unwavering, his voice slicing through the chaos with calm authority. "We're helping her. You got a problem with that?" The man in the red cap squared his shoulders, his jaw tight as he glared between the bikers and Brianna. "Helping her, huh?" he scoffed, his voice laced with doubt. "A bunch of you dressed like that." He stopped himself, looking Brianna over again. "Forgive me if I don't buy it." The lead biker's eyes didn't waver. His body language was steady, unshaken. "You see something wrong with helping a woman stuck on a bridge?" he asked, his tone cool but firm. The other bikers stood in silence behind him, their mere presence amplifying the tension in the air. Brianna longed to speak, to explain what was happening, but her words felt trapped. Fear kept her hands frozen on the steering wheel, her body tense with every passing second. The unease in her chest grew heavier. The man from the truck took another step forward, his eyes burning with challenge. But then, a shorter, stockier biker stepped in, blocking the path of the truck driver. "Listen, man," the biker said, his voice low but firm, "we don't want any trouble. She's stranded. We're trying to get her out of here safely." The truck driver scoffed, his voice rising in anger. "Yeah? And what are you going to do, tough guy, if I don't believe you?" He glanced toward Brianna, his gaze softening for a moment. "Hey, you all right? You want me to call someone?" Brianna hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. The lead biker turned to her, his eyes softening with unspoken understanding, silently telling her, "It's your call." Finally, her courage found a voice. They're helping me," she said, her voice trembling but clear enough for them to hear. "My car won't start." For a split second, the truck driver faltered. His earlier bravado seemed to waver. But before he could speak again, the lead biker stepped forward, his voice strong. "Look, man, you want to help, fine. Park your truck, grab a flashlight, and make yourself useful. Otherwise, get out of the way." The boldness in his tone was undeniable, cutting through the tension like a knife. The truck driver hesitated, then looked from the lead biker to the others, weighing his options. With a grumble, he threw his hands up in defeat. "Fine. Do what you want," he muttered, retreating to his vehicle. The tension in the air finally loosened, and the bikers got back to work. They hooked up the jumper cables and directed Brianna to turn the key. The engine sputtered, then groaned. And with a sudden roar, it sprang back to life. A wave of relief rushed through Brianna, her shoulders sagging as the fear began to drain from her body. The lead biker closed the hood with a satisfying thud, giving it a solid pat. He turned back to her window, his voice calm but practical. "You're good to go, but take it easy. That battery might not last long." Brianna blinked, still processing everything that had just unfolded. Her voice wavered as she spoke. I don't know how to thank you." The lead biker smiled faintly, a hint of something almost tender behind his hard exterior. "Don't worry about it," he replied. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "We're not all bad, you know. Don't believe everything you see on TV." Before Brianna could respond, he turned, signaling to his group. The bikers mounted their motorcycles in unison, the sound of their engines filling the air once again as they prepared to leave. But then, something unexpected happened. The truck driver, now leaning against his vehicle, called out. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with something that almost resembled regret. "Sorry for jumping to conclusions. Guess I was wrong." The lead biker glanced at him, nodding once, but saying nothing. He climbed onto his bike, revving the engine, and the group rolled out in perfect synchronization. The sound of their motorcycles faded into the distance, leaving the bridge eerily silent. Brianna sat in her car, stunned. What had just happened? The moment had been so charged with fear and suspicion, yet it had ended with an unexpected kindness. She looked out at the road ahead, her heart still pounding, but this time, it was for an entirely different reason. But as she drove, the day wasn't over yet. Brianna was about to discover something that would make her reflect on this encounter in ways she never imagined. She cautiously steered her car off the bridge and onto the gravel shoulder just beyond it, her hands still trembling slightly. She needed a moment to breathe, to process everything that had just happened. The scene replayed in her mind, the biker's calm demeanor, the truck driver's hostility, the sudden shift in the air, as if everything had changed in mere minutes. It was surreal, like stepping out of one story and into another. She sat there for a moment, watching the taillights of the truck disappear down the road. Then, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was a flicker of something else there too, gratitude. Those bikers had helped her, despite everything she had feared when they first approached. As she turned the key to head home, she noticed something strange. A small patch, black with white stitching, was folded neatly on the passenger seat. It must have been left behind by one of the bikers when they were working on her car. She picked it up, examining the intricate design. A winged skull with the words "Road Guardians" stitched beneath it. Her curiosity piqued, she made a mental note to look it up later. But for now, she needed to get home and tell Devin everything. As she merged back onto the road, her car's engine sputtered a little but held steady, though it felt like it was struggling with every mile. About 10 minutes from home, her phone buzzed with a faint signal. Without hesitation, she called her husband, Devin, recounting the entire ordeal in a rush of breathless words. "I thought it was going to end badly," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But they were so different from what I expected." Devin listened patiently, his tone calm and reassuring. "Sounds like you ran into some decent folks," he said. "Not everyone's out to hurt you, Bree. Sometimes, help comes from the places you least expect." Brianna couldn't shake the weight of those words as she pulled into their driveway. The familiar sight of their modest one-story house offered a brief moment of comfort, a small sanctuary after everything that had happened. She parked, switched off the engine, and sat in silence, staring at the patch in her hand. Devin greeted her at the door, his arms enveloping her in a protective embrace. "You're okay," he said, his voice soft, as if trying to erase the fear that had clung to her all day. "That's all that matters." She nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that the patch, so simple yet significant, carried a deeper meaning. "Devin," she began, pulling back slightly, "I think they were part of some group. They left this." She handed him the patch. He looked at it, his brow furrowing as he read the words aloud. "Road Guardians," he murmured. "Sounds like a biker charity or something. Maybe they do this kind of thing often." Brianna's eyes widened. "A charity? You think they go around helping people?" "It wouldn't surprise me," Devin replied, his voice thoughtful. "Some of those groups are about more than just riding. They've got codes, missions. They probably saw you needed help and stepped up." Brianna felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest, the fear and uncertainty of earlier now replaced by a deep sense of respect. She decided to look them up later, but just as she reached for her phone, there was a knock at the door. The person standing on their porch wasn't who they expected, and the next twist would leave them speechless. Devin opened the door cautiously, his body angled slightly to shield Brianna from whoever was on the other side. Standing there, illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, was one of the bikers, the lead one. He wasn't wearing his helmet now, and his rugged features seemed more human than intimidating. His eyes, calm and sincere, met Brianna's gaze. There was something in them that made her heart race with unease, but also curiosity. "Evening," he said, his voice steady but low. "Sorry to bother you folks. I just wanted to make sure you made it home all right." Devin glanced back at Brianna, who had frozen in place just behind him. "She's fine," Devin said cautiously. "Thanks for helping her out back there." The man nodded, shifting his weight slightly. "Good. That's good to hear. I didn't want to leave without making sure. You never know what might happen on that bridge." Brianna finally stepped forward, the patch still clutched tightly in her hand. "You left this," she said, her voice trembling as she held it out to him. The biker looked down at the patch, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That wasn't an accident," he said, his tone warm yet matter-of-fact. "It's a little something we leave behind when we help someone. Kind of our way of saying, you're not alone." Brianna's fingers tightened around the fabric as she stared at him, her mind a swirling mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Why," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why go out of your way for someone you don't even know?" The man leaned against the door frame, his gaze steady. "Because someone once did it for me," he said simply. "A long time ago, I was stranded on the side of the road. A stranger stopped to help me. He didn't have to, but he did. He told me, you pass it on when it's your turn. So that's what I've been doing ever since." Brianna felt her chest tighten. The fear that had held her in place earlier now gave way to something more powerful, an overwhelming sense of respect. She had spent so much time judging this man, his group, by their appearance, assuming the worst. But here he was, standing on her porch, offering nothing but kindness. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Eli," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet sincerity. "And if you ever find yourself in trouble again, you look us up. The Road Guardians. We're not too hard to find." Before Brianna could say anything more, Eli gave a polite nod and turned to leave. Brianna watched as he climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life with a deep, vibrating growl. Without a word, he rode off into the night, leaving her standing there, the patch still in her hand, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. Devin closed the door softly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Looks like there's still good people out there," he said quietly. Brianna nodded, her heart full as she looked down at the patch once more. "Yeah," she murmured, "sometimes they're not who you expect." The next day, Brianna couldn't stop thinking about what Eli had said. She looked up the Road Guardians, discovering that they were, in fact, a national group dedicated to helping stranded motorists and supporting families in need. Their motto, "Ride to Protect," resonated deeply with her. She decided to share her story on a community forum, describing the kindness she had experienced and encouraging others to rethink their assumptions about people. The post quickly gained attention, with others sharing similar encounters with unexpected helpers. Sometimes, the lessons life teaches us come in the most unexpected ways. Brianna realized that the world wasn't as divided as it seemed, and that kindness often came from places we least imagined. She vowed to carry that lesson forward, and one day, to pass it on when it was her turn. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect on how small acts of kindness can change someone's life. Share this story, and remember, never judge someone by their appearance. Together, we can build a world where kindness isn't the exception, it's the rule.